Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Chins. The Pakistani ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence. If you ask any Pakistani, he will say it's the number one agency in the world. That apart, we all in India, I think, know that, and their counter effects of what they've been doing in India. But we also need to realize what this is, how this agency became the monster that it is today, how they control Pakistan. And of course, I think we can all see what's happening around us within Pakistan and know that there is a hand of the ISI pretty much in everything that happens around in that country. To discuss this entire thing, I have with me Brigadier S.K. Chatterjee, a very well known in strategic circles, a retired gunner from the Regiment of the Artillery Indian Army, and of course, the editor of BharatShakti.in. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me for this discussion. Actually, a very interesting discussion to understand what is this ISI.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you for getting me on your platform. Yeah, there's a long story to tell as far as I'm concerned. Let's have your first issues in mind.
Yes, sir. So, I'd like to just leave the floor open to you for a, sort of an opening comment about the ISI, just to set a background to this entire thing. We'll obviously go into the history and stuff like that later. But what do you think? What is this organization all about?
For opening comments, what I would like to say about ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence of Pakistan, is they are efficient, they're highly professional, they're absolutely lethal, a huge threat to us, and its activities are global. By global, I don't mean to say they're omnipresent, but I want to put across is the fact that they have gone beyond India, and their activities are not just limited to India, to our neighbors. Maybe we'll come to identify these neighbors a little later, as also in certain European countries. They have their cells over there. So that is the way they operate. And they go into both domestic and beyond the borders intelligence. It's not limited to just gathering foreign intelligence. They go to domestic political intelligence. It wasn't always so, but it is so now. They're very much into internal political intelligence. They by and large get their orders from the army chief of Pakistan. But it's not that every ISI chief has told the line of the army chief. There are cases where they've gone a little, haywire, let's call it, by the army chief's way of thinking, army chief Pakistan's way of thinking, got a little haywire. To give you an odd example, in the 90s, it was Benazir Bhutto at that time, and she wanted Shamsher Rahman Kallu, a retired general, as DG, and she got him there, but the army didn't cooperate with him. Then there's this case in October 1998, I would say. Ziauddin Butt, he was chosen as Director General, though Butt was not the preferred minister, preferred by Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. But as it happened, as they went along, Butt and Nawaz Sharif became quite close, and which wasn't liked by the army chief. And when Pervez Musharraf was the army chief, when Pervez Musharraf actually staged the coup and got into power, he put Butt in jail. But before that, had been nominated as the army chief also by this gentleman, Nawaz Sharif. There have been cases very recently, when we have had the replacement for Faiz Hamid, who was to be replaced by Nadeem Anzum. And it appeared to us, at least, to the press all around, and to everybody all around who keeps attack of ISI, that perhaps they are not on the same page, Imran Khan and the present army chief. But later on, of course, Anzum took over, and I would say it may be a case also of giving Imran an opportunity to show himself as somebody who, has his own mind rather than his mind being whatever is controlled by the army chief. So that's how it is. So that's what I would say primarily as an introductory this thing, introductory comment. By and large, to come down to the gist, they are an excellent, efficient intelligence agency that takes its orders from the army chief. It's very important in Pakistani context to say from where the orders come, because they have more than one power center.
I must say, sir, the comment that you mentioned about Imran Khan being given an opportunity to show his own brain is something uh, very interesting. I think it requires a little more dwelling, and probably we can do that later in the show. But I'd like to ask you at the moment, sir, intelligence services normally are very mute and quiet. They're not known for their, showy presence and stuff like that. That's not the case with Pakistan, and intelligence agencies are normally outward bound. How did this agency become a monster that it is? And, what is the historical story behind this?
It all started really 47, 48 when we had the first of the conflict with Pakistan, let's say, when they sent across their men into Kashmir. And at the end of the conflict, whatever was the conclusion that the army chiefs then drew was there was a weakness in the intelligence setup, whether it's the intelligence setup of the services, the military intelligence, you can say, or the civilian intelligence bureau. There was a lack of coordination, which is a common thing all over the world. It's nothing very new. And that's when I would say this thing called ISI really came up. ISI had no role in collection of internal domestic intelligence at that time. It was just supposed to be meant for intelligence abroad. But except for, of course, Northwest Frontier provinces, which was given to them, they had to collect intelligence about that. Now, President Iskandar Mirza was deposed by Ayub Khan in the 1958 coup, and all national intelligence agencies, they came under the Chief Martial Law Administrator. So that's when the real domination of the military started on the ISI, I would say. And it went on, and this is also the time point in time when they decided to get ISI more involved in domestic intelligence by spying on the Communist Party of Pakistan, as also the Pakistan's People's Party, which was the major opposition at that stage. So they come into the domestic intelligence at this stage very deeply. Gradually, that it strengthened further. The ISI was expanded for all these purposes, but it really grew, I would say, when the Soviet Union were in the 80s, when the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan. You see, that is why ISI was trained in covert operations, and a special cell called the SS Directorate was opened in the ISI. This was created. Now, this covert action division that was created within the ISI, the covert action division was trained by the Americans, and their officers went over there, ISI officers went over there. As also, there was an exchange of instructors, and officers from American intelligence agencies also came and trained officers of the Pakistani ISI over here in Pakistan. So it was a two-way process, and they had a role in major terrorist attacks at that time in Afghanistan. And I would say at this stage, we can possibly think, we go back and look into what they did to us later on. Well, terrorism in Kashmir, of course, is their gift to us. And then July 26, Mumbai train bombings is one example that I would like to give. In 2001, the parliament attack again. Almost every big attack, 2006, Varanasi bombing, August 2007, Hyderabad bombings. Thereafter, you have the Pakistani army was behind the Indian embassy attack on 7th of July 2008. When we lost our defense attaché, we lost an Indian Foreign Service officer also over there. And of course, 26/11/2008, the Mumbai attack. Ajmal Kasab, the whole story rolls out with ISI guidance having started the whole process, really. More recently, I would talk about how you're talking about how it's become a monster. Gurdaspur, Uri, 30 CRPF men gone down there in Pulwama. All this led to, if you recall, the surgical strike from us, then the bombing of Balakot, the terrorist camp. All this is all ISI work. The issues thereafter that we have with ISI, after we undertook the surgical strikes and the Balakot bombing, well, they have been not so violent. It's calmed down. But then this entire business of Kashmir terrorism continues to be funded, motivated, funded, given political support, given international support. All that is being organized by ISI, I would say.
Multi-roles, I must say. Their facets are many, and It's a wonder that a broke country like Pakistan can actually pull off so many things around this thing. And they've not just got broke, they've been broke for a long time now. You spoke about Imran Khan, and that is something that is sticking my mind, sir. And I'd like you to kind of spend a little time in the next answer to explain this, because my question to you is, the internal intelligence which the ISI normally focuses into, and in history we've seen there's always been a battle between the army chief as well as the prime minister, as you've also brought out in your introductory comment, with regards to the chief of ISI, because who does he report to, where does the information go to, and so on and so forth. Wherever the loyalties lie of the ISI chief, that guy seems to have a little more grit within the nation, or the nation state of Pakistan, or the establishment of Pakistan, as they like to call it. So I'd like you to kind of explain to us your analogy about Imran Khan being projected as someone that who uses his own brain, as well as their relationship with the civilian government, and how they are able to balance themselves between the army and the civilian government. Having said that, the say of the civilian government is very, very less, as we all know.
Look, we all know actually Imran came into power with a lot of backing from the army. We all know about it. And also certain political parties were created which were not there before that, and which were actually terrorist organizations converting to political party. You have one which has been created also very recently, but we'll not go to the latest. We'll talk about when Imran came into power. So Imran came into power because the vote share got divided between those political parties. And Imran somehow or the other managed to get hold of whatever majority that he got. So obviously, he was a weak man. He was already bought. As far as the army is concerned, he had to be servile. Otherwise, he couldn't have survived so far. Now, there is a requirement always of also, when you have a prime minister, and the prime minister is somebody like Imran Khan, who is a very dominant personality otherwise, you have to give him some room to create that little bit of aura the Pakistani prime minister must have around him. And that's why perhaps this controversy of the army having decided on a particular general for ISI to be taking over as DG ISI, and Imran not having approved it was started. But ultimately the same man took over. But then it was put across in such a way that Imran has taken a stance. So why has he taken a stance in terms of ISI, who's going to be the DG? It's a very critical appointment, whether it's for the army or whether it's for Imran Khan or whether it's for us across the border. It's an important appointment. So that's what was really attempted. I don't think they really managed to fool anybody, but that was the attempt.
It's interesting when you say that, sir, because the kind of the news that was coming out of Pakistan, and one watches the Pakistani media and their write-ups, as a matter of fact, in Dawn, clearly stated that Imran Khan has dug a hole in front of himself. How that goes forward is anybody's guess, and there's a lot of guesswork happening right now. Some people say 3 months, 6 months, and so on and so forth. So let's see. So, of course, Afghanistan is one place that the world saw the ISI coming into the forefront when, the previous ISI chief brandished himself in front of international journalists, and with a very stylish accent, he said, everything's going to be all right, don't worry. And the stories also were there that he got reprimanded for that entire thing. Well, having said that, how deeply do you think the ISI has actually gone into Afghanistan? How far are they able to yield a certain amount of control over that country? And do they even understand that they are in the deep trouble that they are heading for right now? Or do they have a choice?
Let's just go back a bit. Like I talked about, ISI initially being reached was 47-48. Now, ISI actually grew, I would say, when the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan in 1979. But it is not that it was inoperative there in Afghanistan before that. Even before that, I would say, as far as another decade back, perhaps, they were conducting operations inside Afghanistan against whoever was the ruling elite at that point in time. So they had the network really available over there. That network was activated and funded much better once in 1979 the Soviets came in, and the Americans thought they will find a graveyard for the Soviets, Russians in Afghanistan, like they had faced problems there in Vietnam. Now, the Afghan Civil War, the Soviet Union, like I said in 79, the ISI and the CIA worked together to recruit Muslims throughout Pakistan and Afghanistan, I would say, for a role in their jihad against the Soviet forces. However, the CIA had very little direct contact with the Mujahids. It was CIA's money, it was CIA's weapons, it was CIA's wherewithal, but it was the front end was all ISI personnel. It was they who were training them, it is they who were motivating them, and it is they who were, I would say, even planning attacks. Perhaps going in also with them and really going into the execution aspect of it. So that's the kind of involvement that they had. Later on, especially in the 80s, there was this Operation Cyclone, which was systematically conducted basically for distribution of arms and ammunition. Again, the front end was ISI, the back end was CIA. So it continued like that, and ISI is also involved in some very dirty tricks over there during this period when the Russians were there. See, as they are responsible for the assassination of a couple of heroes of Afghanistan, that includes Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Ahmad Shah Massoud, Northern Alliance, whose forces would later be known as Northern Alliance, I would say. So they have been deeply into Afghanistan. During Prime Minister Bhutto's time, the primary source of support for Hekmatyar was ISI. Right. It's widely known, that Hekmatyar failed to take over power in Afghanistan. So Bhutto possibly lost her interest in this gentleman. And because they could not take over Kabul, that is when they started getting the Taliban into the role, and they started backing Taliban. Taliban, I would say, is largely founded by Pakistan. Their interior minister also had a role in it, Nasrullah Babar. The ISI was, of course, deeply involved right through this thing. ISI is supposed to have trained about 80,000 jihadi for the Taliban and other smaller groups over there. Even after that, after the 9/11 attack, Pakistan claimed to have ended its support to Taliban. After the Twin Towers went down, they said they stopped supporting Taliban. But actually speaking, Bin Laden was found there much later, really. So that sort of an argument really doesn't hold water for too long. That's the kind of involvement that they have had in Afghanistan, I would say, right through the ages.
It's a dangerous game that they play, and both sides of their flanks. That's something pretty interesting to study, whatever said and done. So talking about India, we always fear the presence of sleeper cells, and people who analyze ISI would know for sure that they would have some certain sleeper cells within India. There has also been an analogy which is being created that they have changed their goals from Kashmir today. And the kind of anarchy that is being seen on our streets for whatever reason, and I'm not going to debate the right or wrong, it's just the anarchy that I'm talking about. It's also seen within Pakistan. Similar, marches and so on and so forth. Just the two, if you put the two events together, you see a clear footprint of similarity. Would you agree to something like that? And how far do you think that the ISI is entrenched within the country, sir?
Look, let me put it across this way. As far as the footprint is concerned, well, there's perhaps what we have within our country, I wouldn't say really is as firm as what they have already established in Afghanistan. But their attempt would be so. No, just to give you a little more about Afghanistan first, and then we'll come to this thing. Pakistan has this inevitable problem of strategic depth. That's one problem. And the second problem that they have is of the Durand Line. The Afghans don't really want to recognize this. These are the two major problems between these two countries. So they want Afghanistan to be a vassal state. They want Kabul to be ruled by whoever is their person. It can be anybody, actually, but whoever is their person. It was Taliban yesterday, then it became the Haqqani group, also perhaps yesterday, and today there's a tussle between the Haqqani group and Taliban. And Pakistan is perhaps into this equation, trying to calibrate them so that to retain the top position at the end of the day. Both of them will be dependent. Now, that is retaining relevance in Afghanistan is concerned. As far as we are concerned, they have gone in a much bigger way in a limited area, I would say, Jammu and Kashmir. That is not just the ISI-sponsored terrorism, but it's graduated to a proxy war. But ISI, amongst foreign agency, is the prime agency that we have to face. We are facing in our country. They are the ones who are creating the maximum problem. And I would say, whether it is you go into, I give you certain example, whether it is the Mumbai attack, whether it's the Parliament attack, whether it's anything else, whether it's Pulwama, whether it's Gurdaspur, whether it's Uri, we find that there is a connect to every one of them back home to ISI. So obviously, if they are able to do all these things, they have enough cells working over here within India to be able to guide those people, the terrorists, the mujahids, or whether whoever comes in, to their targets. So they have a setup over here which really needs to be taken cognizance of, and you have to counter that particular threat. And let's say the proxy war is by itself is a huge manipulation. It's a huge manipulation of a certain amount of population also. Certain amount of population also. It's not just, it's a psychological warfare. The terrorist groups really do not have the wherewithal for the kind of psychological operations which the Pakistani armed forces or the Pakistan as a country has launched against us in Kashmir. Everything is shown as, something which is being done in order to dilute the Kashmiri identity, in order to deny the majority religious group its due share of how governance should be in Kashmir. So in every possible way, ISI is involved. Now they're trying, the involvement is not limited to Kashmir. The involvement also goes a little beyond to, I would say, trying to rejuvenate Khalistan. That moment. So you find another area where they're trying to put in their focus, whether it is in India, they're trying to put the right amount of focus in Punjab, or whether it's abroad. The Khalistan demand, whether it's in London, whether it's in Canada, right? It's not just over here. So that global reach wouldn't have been there with a small Khalistani group, which in any case has no traction in Punjab, to be really able to put this thought across so forcefully all across global capitals. It wouldn't have been possible, but for, let's say, ISI having got into the game and provided the wherewithal, provided the complete back-end support for doing this kind of a thing. That's why you find, even in UK, they have a lot of supporters for Khalistan. Maybe you don't have so many in Punjab as you have today in UK or Canada. So we have cracked down on a lot of organizations, as far as we are concerned, on the SIMI, Indian Mujahideen. These are the agencies which were perhaps very vulnerable to their influence. Why say vulnerable? They were possibly influenced by them. So we have done a lot of the job so far. And one more issue that needs to be kept in mind beyond espionage, beyond terrorism, is the drug trafficking, especially in Punjab. These days, you are getting a lot of reports of, let's say, those quadcopters landing in Punjab in the fields, and they have drugs in them or they have explosives in them. But they are trying to fit in as much of drugs as possible into Punjab, outside of Punjab, and will try and ensure that the next generation becomes drug dependent. And that's the way they want to hurt you in your growth story. And that's what I would say is the ISI's footprint over here.
And they tried pretty hard, as a matter of fact, and they've been at it for quite a while. Seems to be quite a concern. So, China would be pretty happy with the fact that the ISI would be able to keep India engaged to a large extent with by the ISI trying to create an incitement here, protest there, and this and that. And that's something that the Chinese love to do with their three warfare strategy and so on and so forth. What kind of help do you think that the Chinese provide to the ISI? And do you think that they are now in a place where you can actually call it a China-Pakistan nexus with regards to this thing, sir?
Well, let me first deal a little bit with the China-Pakistan relationship as it stands, and then we'll get into, well, how does the ISI get into business over there? The first thing is, you see, the entire Pakistani economy today is dependent on China. So they cannot possibly do something which the Chinese do not want. If the Chinese want to influence, I'm sorry, there's not an influence story. The story of the Chinese passing orders to the Pakistanis establishment that you will go about it this way. That's the kind of dependency that they have in Pakistan. If you recall, some time back, the Saudi Arabians wanted their loan to be repaid immediately. The country which really got into the act and bailed Pakistan out
China.
China. It was not a West Asian capital which really got into the act. It was China which got into the capital, got them out of it. Even today, when they grow broke, I think the first place that they can get some money from is China. For China, it's an extension of their national interest, like another province. So if you're spending on a particular province in China, Chinese possibly look at it this way, that if you're spending in Pakistan, you're spending on your own province. They're completely under our control. So that is the relationship between these two countries. The China-Pakistan economic corridor, I mean, it draws Pakistan entirely into the Chinese economic orbit entirely. And the Chinese would like to extend this corridor, go to the Central Asian countries from there, and go beyond to Europe. Well, so obviously Pakistan is very important for them, and they have ensured that the Chinese are completely in control of Pakistan's decision-making, especially foreign policy, as far as they're concerned. Now, our own just think, looking at this kind of a nexus, well, we have a bigger nexus. We've always been talking about the two-front theory. And any two-front theory or our single-front theory, whenever it comes to military warfare, there's a question of having to gather a lot of intelligence to pursue it successfully. And obviously, the Chinese will depend on the kind of intelligence which the ISI can provide them. The Chinese penetration into our country for intelligence gathering may not be as strong as the Pakistani penetration already is. We talked about all those incidents, Simi, etc., those groups, Indian Mujahideen, those groups. So obviously, I mean, the Chinese are dependent on them, and they're getting a lot of intelligence perhaps through these people. Then ISI's linkage with China driven by these compulsions and also a host of benefits from these issues, like I talked about it. You see, the other benefits also, I would say, firstly, taking benefits. The ISI does not have that kind of a technological reach in terms of intelligence gathering this thing. So whether it's satellite intelligence we are talking about, or whether you're talking about communication intelligence, electronic intelligence, whatever you're talking about, I'm sure the Chinese are providing them. And where they are also helping is perhaps the Chinese are trying to increase their, I would say, intelligence capabilities as also influence in our northeastern states. After all, Doklam has been activated. There has been problems in other areas also. You have a Rohingya problem also going on over there. And these are states, let's say Myanmar as a state already is, I would say, partly in the Chinese orbit. So they operate there also. So as far as the cross-the-border information is concerned, ISI has been trying to penetrate over there for a long time. They may have certain amount of penetration. So obviously, it's a very nice marriage. It suits both. You have your resources there, I have some resources. You're weak somewhere, I'm strong somewhere. So I help you with my strengths and you help me with your strengths, and both of us become stronger. So that's the kind of game I would say that they have with the Chinese.
Interesting. It's a wonder why the Chinese keep on, and you've kind of said it that the Chinese would treat it like their own province, but probably a province gone rogue at some point of time. I'm not sure how the Chinese are going to take that. So, leaving India and Afghanistan, which is, of course, the neighborhood for the Pakistanis, how would you kind of describe their activities within, let's say, Europe or the Americas or any other part of the world for that matter?
We talked about Afghanistan, of course, that they've been active over there especially since the Russians went in 1979. So that's one country. And Afghanistan, they are still controlling the power equations, at least in Kabul, and they're very much in touch with, I'm sure, the other groups that are there, whether it's Uzbeks or whether it's Hazaras or whether it's Tajiks, they're in touch with them. The ISI was also involved in sending arms to Bosnian Mujahideen in Bosnia Herzegovina when that genocide of Muslims was carrying on. So they have the wherewithal to reach that particular place. Otherwise, they couldn't have suddenly gone into Bosnia or to help the Bosnian Muslims. They must have had some sort of wherewithal or some sort of understanding with some other agency. I would say they have some sort of operational capability in UK, France, the United States. These operational capabilities are not for exploding bombs, etc., but these operational capabilities are for influence operations, like we are talking about. Influence operation. You can do it through the media. You can do it through other means, both covert and overt. Let's say means are available for doing a perception management campaign in any of these capitals, and these capitals do matter to us also. Then they have a very firm presence in Bangladesh, the ISI. They have their role. This thing. If you recall the previous regime in Bangladesh, I'm not talking about the current one. The current regime has taken a lot of action to get to de-radicalize, I would say, or at least to stop radicalization of Bangladesh any further. Though that's not happening, that radicalization is increasing, but at least the pace is much more gradual. But as far as intelligence gathering is concerned, ISI has a proper network over there, which is again I would say, the cohorts with the radicals in Bangladesh, and that's how they have carried out certain amount of attacks very recently also. And then you have had these cases of the temples being burnt, etc. All this have some sort of an ISI hand in it. Let's go beyond Bangladesh. Nepal has a very fair amount of ISI footprint over there, and all the smuggling which goes on, especially, and all this fake currencies which used to come in. A lot of it used to come in. It was all ISI created a network which was working this out, in addition to maybe others, but ISI was definitely a big part in that particular thing. And let's just deviate for a second and let me just tell you, how does this thing really work out? If you want to get hold of, continue with terrorism, you have got to continue with funding, like you were talking about sometime in between. All this funding is basically this drug trade. If you can get hold of the drugs, get hold of the raw material from Afghanistan and refine them to some extent in Pakistan, and then send that heroin across to some other place where you have the finest refining, and the market ultimately is best. The best market is in Europe and US itself, the end user market. And of course, we have a lot of market even in our country and our neighboring countries. But then this is the kind of funding which is, this is the kind of money which then gets cycled for terrorism. Right. So ISI influence to go beyond Nepal, I would say Maldives also. There's an India out kind of noise being made in Maldives, and these things definitely have an ISI influence over there. Sri Lanka, amongst our neighbors, the ISI is very much operative over there. So all our neighboring countries have been focused upon by and large by Pakistani ISI in order to, while China tries to do it in a different way, they try to do it the soft way, try to gather information about us and also create some problems along our border, whether it's, let's say, the spread of radicalism or whether it is the penetration of terrorist groups. So all this really can be credited to ISI.
It's interesting when you actually say that for a country like Pakistan, it's been focused. And one thing that what you're saying is its hatred towards India has made it take certain steps, which has probably resulted in certain amount of gains for itself, but it's also resulting in what is happening in Pakistan today with regards to its economic situation and so on and so forth. And it's also self-dependence on drugs of its own people. So that's, I think the monster is going to come back and bite them. It's only a matter of time. So, to close this entire thing, I'd like you to kind of take us through the factor that I believe one thing, and our intelligence services have not, as an ex-chief of RAW had once said that we're only known by our failures. I think it was Mr. Vikram Sood who said this, and not by our successes. And that's something very interesting to me, because there is an agency on the other side who would boast that we've done this and so on and so forth, at least to their own audience. We also see, in spite of the fact of our very good intelligence, which has had its issues in history and so on and so forth, that the ISI is still able to actually attain its motive. For that matter, the entire Khalistani issue that suddenly popped up during these farmer protests, and again, as I mentioned, the kind of anarchy we saw on the streets showed certain signs and showed certain uh, hints of the ISI's backing or presence within this particular thing, because this issue just got raised up all around the world in the countries that you mentioned, Canada, US, UK, which were more friendly or more open to the presence of ISI within themselves. What do we do to kind of negate this entire effect and push the ISI out from its influence operations?
Look, firstly, let me say that intelligence is a matter of constant endeavor. You cannot just win a particular intelligence battle or a particular battle, and based on intelligence, you win it and say, great, I've done a great job. So to some extent, I agree with Mr. Sood that, well, failures come to light as far as India is concerned. After all, we've had a setback in Kargil. There was also supposed to be some sort of a inch drawback. Even in Eastern Ladakh, we've had a little bit of delayed, I would say, passage of information. Initially, of course, we caught up with it and we had enough intelligence on ground and then up in the sky also at a later stage. And I'm sure right now we have the capability to gather intelligence of the moment. But having said that, I would say that there are two major aspects of intelligence, as far as we are concerned, how to strengthen ourselves against them. The two major aspects of intelligence, one is called counterintelligence and the other is intelligence gathering. Now, intelligence gathering, we all understand. But counterintelligence is what we have to understand. This is also part of your, I would say, part of your preparations to minimize the influence of ISI in your own territory. Counterintelligence is basically denial of intelligence, a question of ensuring that your people don't fall in the ISI trap and go ahead with it. We've, of course, got to improve on our intelligence gathering. Like we talked about, taking capabilities, etc., for Kargil or whether for Eastern Ladakh, etc. Of profound value is human intelligence. If you have a mole in the enemy's headquarters, well, you've done your job. That's as good as a whole lot of satellites, the kind of information that you can get from a mole. But mind you, a lot of moles are also double agent. So it's not so easy. It's easy for me to say over here that get hold of moles, but getting hold of moles is not so easy. Historically, it has been seen that plenty of moles have turned out to be double agents. In any case, to win the trust of the other side, he's also got to pass some information. Otherwise, how will he get some information? So he's also got to do something about it to get the information. So if you can get hold of a mole, nothing like that. So we should constantly endeavor to build our human intelligence as simultaneous with, of course, the focus that we have on taking intelligence available to our services. Hopefully, now with more satellites and more surveillance equipment, etc., we will have covered most of the gaps. We need greater intelligence sharing amongst our agencies. So even now, there's a tendency to work in silos and not really cooperate with each other. So we need more, some sort of the American model can be looked at. They have a director intelligence on top who coordinates the intelligence of all the major intelligence agencies. So at least at some point, there is some sort of a congregation of information that has been gathered by all, an analysis done, and well, maybe a better analysis and a better report comes out of it. So we have to do that. We have certain problems, like the refugee problem that we have. Let's take the latest, the Rohingya problem. Now, it's a question of stateless, homeless, penniless people who can be, very easily swayed. I won't say very easily swayed, but who can be swayed at a very low cost also. At a very low cost also. Even if you don't have the budget for it, you might be able to do it over some or the other. They have to be sealed away from this kind of influences. You can easily build in a higher, I would say, resonance of radicalization levels in this kind of a refugee population. Then you can find in a stable let's say, city somewhere in any part of India where people have got their job, they're by and large doing well, etc. So our economic, I would say, conditions of the lower strata is an important aspect. Now is you see again, we had too much into this appeasement game. If we have to arrest a chap at times, we think perhaps thrice before we really arrest him. I mean, I'm not talking about arrest now, but a simple example is there's so much of action being taken against certain groups in J&K. Some are being banned, some are being, put under observation. The enforcement directorate is getting after some of them. Why wasn't all this being done? After all, these agencies, those who led them, had also been feeding a lot of funding into the movements there in J&K. So we seem to have neglected that for some political gains, for some appeasement stories, right? So I would say, it's our job, every generation's job, my job to have done it for you, your job to do it for your children and their peers, that we leave behind a stable, stronger, inclusive India and a secular India where you can practice whatever you feel like, but then you have to be tolerant about what the other person also this thing. So if you have social cohesion, as such, your capability to for resisting counterintelligence is enhanced quite a bit. In a society which is fragmented, counterintelligence information gathering by the enemy from you will be much more easy. So I would say, for the time being, I would say that there's constant vigilance. That is what one can do, and ISI will continue with its efforts. There is no way that one can put your guard down and let the ISI creep in any further. And in this business of intelligence, there are no rules to play by. One must also understand that we should be able to retaliate harder.
Correct. Cost.
That's very important. Retaliate harder. Until and unless you increase the cost for the enemy, he's not going to stop. We have retaliated harder in the last couple of years, and there is certain amount of evidence, at least, that we have not been targeted as violently as we had been earlier. So one is, of course, work against the Mujahids also. And this second issue is ensure that the Pakistani state, the Pakistani army, the way you retaliate by itself becomes a deterrent to them. So full spectrum, I would say.
Absolutely. A whole of government and a whole of nation approach towards this particular
thing.
But one thing I really caught on to when you said that, fragmented society is more easier to penetrate into. And I don't want to hint at anything, but the Pakistanis are pretty badly fragmented. So that's probably an opportunity for us to not fragment them further, but at least be able to penetrate their lines and get more information for our own benefit. I don't think we want a fragmented Pakistan that's going to become a pain for us, but I agree with you that there is an opportunity that probably we are. I'm not sure because I don't follow the intelligence, and none of us can because it's pretty highly secretive in India. But it's probably an opportunity that is there in front of us for us to, make use of. So this has been an enlightening discussion. I think you've taught us something today about the ISI, that it's a multifaceted organization, and if it was not from an adversary country, I for sure would be pretty happy to study about them. I still am, but I think I'll be a little more open-minded in understanding their operations rather than looking at it through an Indian's perspective, which probably gives me a certain amount of bias when I'm trying to understand what their operations is all about. So that's something that I take home from this interview. And, one of the biggest things is that takeaways from what you're saying is that it's our capability that needs to be brought up to a point where we are able to resist and reduce the opportunities for such agencies to kind of make use of our vulnerable population in certain sectors. And we've seen honey traps and so on and so forth coming out pretty often. So it's not that they're sleeping, but it's for us to kind of try and negate these kind of issues. And one good thing that I can see that you've also brought out, a lot more of these issues are being brought out right now, and their people are being caught. So that just means there is some sort of a activity within our country also to kind of reduce and remove the presence of these sleeper cells. Having said that, sir, this is going to be a great thing to see how the ISI is going to take Pakistan forward with its current economic situation and the future of Mr. Imran Khan, who's, I don't know if he's at loggerheads or they all say that the next 3 months are pretty critical. So let's see how it goes. In any case, sir, thank you so much for taking out the time for doing the study and taking us through this journey of the history, the past and the current of the ISI. I'll probably try and disturb you once more in the future on another topic, another day, sir. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Adi. It is a privilege to have been on your platform. And anytime you want me, you said you want me one more time, anytime that you want me, I'm available for you. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you, sir.